everyone. Good afternoon, and welcome to our first Sticky Standards and Open Office Hours. I'm Julie Dennis, CIS National. I'm joined with Chris Murray and with Kelly Mears, and we also have Laura Van Dusen working from Denver on the call as well. A couple of housekeeping notes. First of all, this call is being recorded, so if you want to go back at any time, we will be putting the recordings up on the NRC afterward, and you can check them out. Secondly, it's suggested that if you are only dialed in, I should say, using your computer to access the audio, you might want to dial in. We noticed that some of the computer connections can be a little bit hard to hear, so dialing in might be your best bet to get the clearest connection. And lastly, you'll notice that there's a lot of beeps going on. Those are folks trying to call. You are actually not muted. And so the reason that we wanted to do that is because we really hope that for this series of open office hours that we can make it more conversational, make it really kind of a focus about you and your affiliates and questions that you have about the standards, reaccreditation, or anything in between. So, why are you not working? So there we go. So anyway, so as I mentioned, this is the first month. We will be doing these for the next, this is one of 4 in the series. So it's the 4th Thursday of every month. So we'll see you back here in 4 weeks. And basically we have some items that we think we can go over and we think are pertinent and you'll find helpful and hopefully informative. But also, again, we are here to answer any questions, which is why you are not muted. So really, I want to just reiterate the fact that this is your time and the focus is on you and your affiliate. And what I mean about the muting. So I'm going to actually go ahead and just really quickly.
Are we mute?
Yep, I'm going to mute you, Debbie, and I can always unmute you. You can always put a question in the chat. So just let us know. Oh, did she? Okay. So, as I mentioned, this is your time, and we're going to get right into it with our agenda for today. So we are, of course, talking about some sticky standards. We're going to do a little bit of intro into about the standards, how we came about these sticky standards, and really there were a top 11 commonly missed business standards. So what we're going to do with these business standards is we're going to focus on half of them this month, half of them in the month of March. Then we'll move on to some student support standards for April, and then for May, as reaccreditation date for 2018 approaches, we're just going to kind of go over some last-minute things to think about. But of course, we always welcome questions. And so general tips for reaccreditation will be included in this. We'll discuss resources, questions, as usual. All right, so we're going to talk a little bit about the standards and the data used. So how did we collect this? So 35 affiliates went through reaccreditation in 2017, and we took data. Data was available for 31 of those 35 affiliates. So that's where we're getting these commonly missed business standards, the commonly missed student support standards, and then again, those, as I mentioned for the May webinar, some like quick things to check. And so these are the top 11 business standards missed. And why do we, why am I telling you this? It's really for those who maybe went through reaccreditation in 2017 who are on the call, or those who are going through 2018, and even those who are going through in 2019, we always want to reiterate that reaccreditation is a process. So it's about learning, it's about kind of, making your affiliate to be the best affiliate it can be, and we understand that it's just not something that you check boxes. It's really about making it about learning and about using what we've learned in looking at the data from these 31 affiliates to really empower you to, improve your affiliate. So TQS is a learning process, and so we're hoping that you can learn from the data that we've collected and from the commonly missed standards. So here's a list of sticky business standards. So you'll notice that many of them are tied. These are the top 11. And we also, for your information, put how many, the number of affiliates that were in progress for 2017 and the % of the cohort that were in progress which means that they missed that standard. And we put that there for your information, but also as a reminder for us at CIS National that really we need to always be thinking about continuous improvement on our own end, and with us, TQS is also a learning process, as we know it is with the affiliates, and so we really want to use this data to help us support you. So we are identifying areas of concern that are key risk areas and understanding kind of what affiliates are struggling with so that we can create resources or get resources to help you better empower your affiliate to meet the intent of these standards. And I think that that also brings up another important part, which is intent. Again, when we are talking about the business standards and the student standards, it looks like, remember, you're not muted, so if you think that there might be background noise, you just might want to mute yourself. Great. But anyway, so when we are talking about these standards, we always want to think about intent, and that's something that probably you'll see kind of woven through this lecture part of the open office hours, and then it's just not about checking boxes, but really about you know, assessing risk and how do you lessen risk for your affiliate. So these are the the 11 sticky standards. You can see many of them are tied. So today's sticky standards that we'll be focusing on are really broken up into two components. We have some financial pieces with the financial monitoring and the financial management and accountability policies, and then there's also what we are kind of putting into the personnel. So it's personnel volunteering screening procedures. And I think I just saw a question come up maybe about the PowerPoint. So the PowerPoint will be, you'll be able to download it right from the NRC. So if you can't quite see the PowerPoint now, you should momentarily, and I'm always more than welcome to just email it out if you would like that as well. So anyway, so we've divided into financial aspects and then the personnel aspects. So let's get right into it. So Business Standard 4.2, Financial Monitoring. This was the #1 commonly missed standard for business standards. And so a couple of things to note about this standard. So you'll note in the upper right-hand corner there's a little clock, and that's important because really with this standard, the name of the game here is time, because we require 4 quarters of financial report outs. And those 4 quarters are balance sheet, cash flow projections, and budget to actual. And then we also require monthly budget to actual reviews. And so what was most commonly missed was the cash flow projections, specifically that they were usually not included. And so what we've tried to do to mitigate that for the cohort going through in 2018 is that we've actually found a Wallace Foundation template that is up right now on the NRC, and there's the link to it as well in the PowerPoint on cash projections. And so you can just download that. It seems fairly straightforward. Kind of plug and chug your numbers into there, and it will give you the cash flow projections for 6 months. There's also the NRC page on financial management, and I think that there was another bit of confusion around kind of what we meant with receipt and review, which is the exact wording in the 2018 tweaked standards. So receipt and review just means that you are allowing your board every quarter to receive and review the documentation of, excuse me, the balance sheet, cash flow projections, and budget to actuals. And so most of those, what we saw in 2017 is that a lot of folks just did that in their board meetings. But we've also seen affiliates email that information out, you know, every quarter, just showing the email that goes out, and so that is okay too. So yes. Oh, and just one more thing to note is it's quarterly 6-month cash flow projections. So I think that that was just something I wanted to clear up if there was any confusion there. All right, so Business Standard 3.4 is about financial management and accountability policies. So a lot of affiliates from 2017 got most of the standard correct, but there was a bit of confusion over a very specific part, which I'll get to in just one moment. So what's required is the policies incorporating all aspects of the standard, and then board minutes showing approval of these policies. But what was most commonly missed was the credit card security aspect, and this is really important. The credit card security is not for your affiliate having a credit card that you use for certain purchases. It is for when someone comes to your website and perchance makes a donation using a credit card. We need to know that that credit card information is secure and that that information is kept private. So, for example, if you are if you use PayPal or some other sort of, third vendor processing, processing vendor, then you could put in language about that, saying, we use this processing vendor and they, ensure the security of the credit cards used. Some affiliates maybe do not accept credit card donations, in which case, if that was the case, then we would accept language saying, we currently do not accept credit card donations, and that would be that. And then, of course, if you do accept credit card donations, but you do not use a third-party vendor, then you would just need to ensure that there's language in there explaining that you don't keep credit cards on file, you do not share credit card information with anyone, and just really think about security with credit card donations in that regard. That was, yes.
This is Laura. I'm just curious, from people on the call, if people may be willing to share a little bit, do you use third-party vendors? Do you have people call into your office and maybe give donations over the phone where you have staff taking down credit card information? Just sort of curious about the practice out there and what people are doing, if anyone feels comfortable answering that.
Yeah, I love it. Conversation. Does anyone on the call want to share?
That's
okay too. Thanks.
Catherine from Michigan. We haven't taken any credit card donations. So yeah, it's a good question for us to look into.
Okay. For those who couldn't hear, that was Catherine in Michigan, and she just mentioned that they don't do credit card donations. And that was actually, that brings up a good point, that if you don't accept credit card donations, that is fine, but you would still need to include some sort of language telling us that in the policy. So that basically we know that you're not accepting credit card donations and not thinking that you inadvertently left it as policy.
Yeah, and just to jump in here to elaborate on that, yes, it's for us to know, but it is for you all to have a policy on hand that says you will not accept credit card donations, right? So there needs to be a policy in place that governs the security of credit card information that may or may not flow through your office.
Right, and this is Laura. The one thing I would add, and I'm sure most of you are aware of this, is that there are some very strict regulations around if you accept credit cards, what the requirements are to keep that information secure. And I know on the NRC, Julie has some great links to what those specific requirements are. But by not having a policy, if someone were to take a credit card and not know, very innocently, maybe someone calls, says, I want to give a donation, I heard about your organization. If they were to take down credit card information over the phone or something like that were to happen, there could be some significant risks to your organization for having that information without having a process and policies around how to maintain it. So it really is a good place just to be sure that you're clear on and then sure that your staff are clear on those expectations because of some of those legal consequences if we don't handle credit card information very carefully.
And CS of Metro Detroit says in the past we've used PayPal for credit card donations on our website. So that's great.
Yeah.
I'm going to hide that. Again, for those who maybe don't want to unmute themselves or talk on the phone, you can always chat in your question or your comment in the chat box, and I will be checking them periodically. And as Laura mentioned, I do have the NRC page on financial management and accountability, and there's a lot of resources there. And I just want to reiterate that we get a that you as an affiliate have access to the Nonprofit Risk Management Center, and they have so many resources, webinars. They actually have a policy center that can help you craft policies, and so I would highly recommend that you check that out, and you can actually access it through the NRC. There's a little, on the right-hand side, there's a little button that will connect you right to it. So. We actually have a question about, regarding the first slide. So if monthly budget to actual review is required to share with board, can it just be the finance committee? Full board meetings are not monthly, but monthly communication with finance committee is regular. So actually on that first slide, which I will go back to, maybe. No. Pull it up. So it's actually monthly with your staff and or board member review, and the reason for the and or board member is I believe that when this standard was originally written, we recognized that several of our affiliates might not have staff that would be able to, smaller affiliates might only have an ED and site coordinators, and so it doesn't really make sense to be sharing your budget to actuals with site coordinators. So they would share with, like, perhaps the board finance person. So if you have staff that you, for example, if you are the ED and you have, maybe a CFO or some sort of administrative person who helps with certain aspects of finance that would make sense to share those, that would be somebody that you could share with those monthly on the monthly budget. Great, thank you for your question. All right, so moving on, we kind of lumped so business standard 3.5 and 3.6, so personnel policies and volunteer policies respectively. And why, of course, they are put in together in one slide is because they're very similar. They have a lot of corresponding pieces, and it just is that one makes sense that it's for personnel and the other is for volunteer. So what's required, the policies incorporating all aspects of the standard. I'm not going to go into the nitty-gritty unless you have questions about it. Actually, I'll talk about this a little bit later, but we did go into them quite in depth last year during our webinar series, and all of those webinars are currently up on the NRC. So you also need board minutes from the past 3 years showing approval, and then documentation for staff and volunteers showing receipt of a handbook and receipt of an understanding and signing of a confidentiality agreement. So I want to really dive into what was most commonly missed. So there were definitely certain aspects of the standard crisis management plan, so making sure that all your staff and volunteers know the school in which they are serving crisis management plan. Also transportation. We really leave the transportation aspect up to you as an affiliate. You are the best person to assess the risk involved in that for your affiliate. Some affiliates don't allow it, some do. I think it really depends on, where you are, who you are, what services you're providing, but you do need to have some sort of policy in there stating whatever that is that you've decided. And then interaction with staff and volunteers, and then mandatory reporting. We want to highlight that all of this is really the youth protection focus. So again, it's not just checking the boxes to say, yes, I have a transportation policy, yes, I have an interaction with staff and volunteers as it pertains to how students can interact with them, yes, I have the mandatory reporting. It's really about how can you, as an affiliate, best assess and really deter any risk for, in particular, the youth that you're serving. And then the other big part that was missing was the documentation of receipts. So what we have done, there's a lot of ways that you can do this. Again, this is very much up to you and your affiliate, but what we have done is we actually have an Excel spreadsheet for documentation, and while I think in the past that used to be only for, we would give it to you when you were going through reaccreditation, we actually just added it to the personnel page on the NRC at the very bottom. So if you check out those links to the NRC on personnel, you'll find it at the bottom. It's just an Excel spreadsheet. It has a tab for board, staff, and volunteers, volunteer, and obviously we'd be focusing on staff and volunteer, and you just fill in, you know, Susan started on this date, and she filled out her confidentiality on this date, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So there's a lot of information there you can use. Great. Are there any specific questions about this one? Or anything anyone wanted to add? Okay. So we'll go through our last, let's see, there we are. So another one that was commonly missed is kind of in the same vein is the Business Standard 3.7 screening procedures. And I want to be very clear that what was most commonly missed was the description of a process for supervising minors under the age of 18, which, since we noticed that it was missing a lot or it wasn't clear what the policy was in some aspects, but then we also noticed that affiliates were putting it in their volunteer policies, which makes sense because it does pertain to volunteers. So although for reaccreditation in 2017, it was under screening procedures, we actually have since moved that aspect, which is the description for the process of supervising any minors under age 18, to Business Standard 3.6 volunteers, and we did that with our January 2018 tweaks to standards. Now that does not mean that if you already have it in Business Standard 3.7 that you have to move it. We will find it one way or the other. It just seemed that it made a lot of sense for affiliates going through in 2017, which is of course where we got all this data, that they put it under volunteer policies, and so we just thought, well, that makes sense, and we'll put it under volunteer policies and include it there. So the other thing here is that some affiliates, again, you are best to assess if you will allow minors under the age of 18 to volunteer. Some affiliates do not, and you just need to state that you would not have volunteers under the age of 18 if that is the case. But again, that is something that with, you know, youth protection, you and your board are best to assess what is the best moving forward for your affiliate. There's many resources on the NRC page on background checks that can be used here as well, including language about if you do have volunteers under the age of 18 and how they would be supervised. You can kind of tweak it. Also
Julie,
note that, yep.
Sorry. This is Laura again. I just wanted to jump in with one thought, if you don't mind.
Sure.
One of the things, too, when you're thinking through that policy for do we have minors under 18 years of age, I know a lot of people are thinking things like, do we have, maybe if you do like a backpack program, do kids come and pack the packs for backpacks? You know, thinking of volunteers in that more traditional sense. But just also be thinking about maybe you have a program where some of your case-managed high school kids go in and do volunteer reading for elementary schools. So even though it's a support you're providing, also be thinking about if they're sort of volunteering on behalf of your organization, providing a service, what that looks like and what that supervision should be. So just want to make sure when you're thinking about it, there are a couple different pieces to look at.
Absolutely.
Right. Thanks.
Yeah, of course. Thank you. And just really quickly for what's required, the screening procedures, but also the board minutes showing approval of current procedures. So I just forgot to mention that before. All right, so now we're actually at the end of the kind of, well, stopping for questions. We've gone through half of the most commonly missed business standards, which is all we'll cover for today. I do have a few more slides if folks are going through reaccreditation this year in 2018 or even next year in 2019, some slides to think about, but I wanted to stop for questions if anyone had any questions about, and I will check the chat, about any of the standards that we went over, or any of the other standards. I take questions about all the standards. You might need to unmute yourself if you muted yourself before. Okay. Well, we'll have plenty of time for questions. Again, I really do want to make this more conversational, and so I'm hoping that folks will be willing to kind of share when we get to some of the discussion questions at the end. I'm just going to hide the chat box, and we're going to move on. So preparing for reaccreditation. So I'm thinking that a lot of you are perhaps in the 2018 cohort, or maybe you're supporting affiliates who are going through in this year. Or maybe you're just in 2019 and getting ahead of the game, or you just went through reaccreditation and you want to learn more. But regardless of where you are, these next couple of slides will just provide some helpful tips and tricks for how to best prepare for reaccreditation. So general reaccreditation tips are that, if you are going through in 2018, you have folder structure in box.com, and that has a lot of guides in it, and they're really there for your use, the guides and the folders. So I know that I've mentioned before, if it's confusing that you have, the 5 schools that you're going to be uploading different documentation for student support, you can rename those schools. So I think on the January 12th webinar for the cohort, I renamed one of the schools, Rainbow Elementary. And if you want to rename all of them or only some of them, or if you don't want to rename them, it's up to you. And we really want you to kind of use Box and make it your own. Also that we would just require that, or request, I should say, not require, but just if, don't wait until the last minute. We really want to make sure that folks are kind of getting things in and not doing it on May 31st for the June 1st deadline. We also think it would just be easy, I think it's easier if, you have the board minutes from a recent board meeting, just upload them to Box, and then you already know that that's done. We would, request again that you use kind of traditional and easy naming conventions, so CS Honolulu AOP for FY18. And then, of course, we would recommend you checking out all of the resources on the NRC. As I mentioned, we have the webinar series from last year up there. We have tons of resources under nonprofit operations page, and actually I will be getting to those momentarily. So just a real quick timeline. We are currently in here, this space. So June 1st is when Box.com closes, and that's when we, at National, we beginning our review. And the review, because we do come through, these documents very thoroughly, will take several months. During this June to September period, we will be doing our state visits and verification procedures, and then the governance committee votes, and they will begin voting in the fall, winter of 2018. So we will, as I think I mentioned, be doing more communications throughout the process. But for anyone going through for FY18, if you don't, I don't want people to panic if it's been, September and you haven't gotten your vote back. Again, we are going through these documents quite thoroughly. We create a report, and then the governance committee only meets once a month. So we really want to just reiterate the fact that, it's nothing to panic about. We anticipate that the votes won't be until the fall or winter of later this year. So resources, as I mentioned, the nonprofit operations section. Again, as I mentioned, the Nonprofit Risk Management Center, it's free. They have so many good articles, webinars, and again, that policy generator. And then you can find the past webinars on the NRC, and they are under the accreditation process, affiliate standards. So last year, the webinar series consisted of really doing deep dives into specific sets of standards. So I remember I did one on some personnel policies, verifications, affiliate planning. So there's lots of webinars there, and then they all link to the resources on the NRC. And of course, if you ever have any questions about finding something, you can reach out to our resource navigators. Their contact information is there. And as I mentioned very quickly, we will be doing these monthly from now through May. So for Thursday of every month, no need to sign up in advance. They're very open office hours. I want to get through the rest of my slides so we can chat more. But we're really here for that time to answer any questions that you have as you go through the reaccreditation process or just want to improve your policies in general. So now I did see a question in the chat, but which I will get to, but I did want to put these 2 discussion questions up to kind of maybe entice us to chat a little bit more. Kind of what are your expected challenges, and then what information do you need to help you and your affiliate become successful? So what you can think about that while I go to the chat box. So this question, this is great. Thanks, Tiffany, for this question about Business Standard 3.11 data verification. We'll actually be talking specifically more in depth about this standard in the next webinar. But no, oops, I lost the question. The question is, do we need an outside person to conduct the data verification? And the answer is that you would, in your procedures, outline what employee, like what position, would do those data verifications, and it's typically not outside. It's someone within your organization, and that's done as well for protecting the student.
Yeah, but I think we want to be clear that it would not be the site coordinator or case manager who enters the data doing the data verification. So it would be somebody additionally, and I would also recommend that be, if you have kind of multiple people working at one school, that it would be somebody from outside of the school. So it may be a lead site coordinator depending on your capacity, it might be an executive director depending on kind of your staffing, or a program director of some kind doing that data verification, but not the person who enters the data.
And there's actually an example of the procedures on NRC in the data verification page, and you can just download the example at the bottom, and it kind of brings up like, CIS of Honolulu's program manager is the position that will, do the data verification, and they do it this time, and this is how they do it. So that might be a good resource. Okay, for the confidentiality agreement, which in volunteer policies, sorry, this is longer. Confidentiality incorporated in volunteer policies signed by. Okay, so the question is about specifically Business Standard 3.6 volunteer policies. The statement about confidentiality is incorporated within the volunteer policies, which is signed by all volunteers. Is that sufficient, or will we need volunteers to sign a separate form? I would say that if it is covering the aspects of the confidentiality agreement, then that is sufficient. We have accepted in the past, on the other side, personnel policies. Maybe you don't have personnel policies, but you have like a employee handbook that incorporates a plethora of different standards. It might include Business Standard 3.4, 3.5, some other business standards in there, and so we have we've accepted that. I just would want to make sure that that language, confidentiality incorporated within the volunteer policies. I would just want to make sure that the confidentiality language is very clear, that they are signing a confidentiality agreement. And as long as that language is clear, then we would accept that. Do you have anything to add, Chris?
No, that makes sense. Yeah, so if you can consolidate those things, I think that's perfectly fine. And then, as long as you sort of, we will review. You don't have to upload them twice. If you're going through reaccreditation, you don't necessarily have to upload them twice. You can upload them once. Julie, if you are going through this year, Julie did a webinar not that long ago for the reaccreditation cohorts where she explained how you might alert us to things like that in the process using Box.com notes or sending us an email or something, just letting us know so we don't miss those types of things. But generally, we're able to spot those and basically essentially make it so that you've met the standard, so it shouldn't be a problem.
We have a question here, which I'm actually going to reply back with a question. So we can explain more about the other types of verifications, the background checks, and the consent forms. Is there something in particular that you wanted to know? So I'm not sure. I'm not sure exactly if you have a question specifically, or if you just want me to talk about them. What would you like to know about them? Oh, and a data manager, I think, is that in, let's see here. So Katie, I don't know if you want to unmute yourself and maybe ask, or if you just want me to talk about background checks, I can do that. Oh, great. Tiffany, I'm glad we got your question answered. Wonderful. Can you share additional information? Yes, Jessica, great question. So for those of us who remember the January 12th webinar, there is a component 3 of the 4 components of reaccreditation that's called assessment, and affiliates are not required to distribute surveys or do anything like that. That's more, I would say, on an ad hoc basis. It's something that we purposely kind of went from 2 to 4 on the webinar just because we don't really require anything currently for affiliates.
Yeah, and I can jump in with a little bit more detail on that, just sort of some history there. We had, thought when we launched the sort of revised reaccreditation process that we might be incorporating some of the organizational health assessment pieces that we've built. We decided that was primarily something that would be used as needed, just as Julie mentioned, and so it isn't something that you necessarily have to worry about, and we would let you know if we felt like that was something we needed to dive into. And it's usually built in as part of our support process. If we have affiliates that are potentially struggling or are having sustainability issues, we may step in with some additional supports around that to assess. And so we determined it was probably best to not make that assessment piece kind of consistent across all affiliates and use on an ad hoc basis. What we are exploring currently and why that component has stayed in there, though it's probably causing too much confusion at this point, we can probably think about how we reframe it for folks, but we may introduce kind of different sort of performance assessments going forward that would be sort of less detailed reviews of documentation and more kind of clear understanding of business operations and kind of using performance metrics. So it's something as part of our new business planning process that you probably all have seen at least some information about that is being explored currently as it relates to TQS, but isn't something that folks, unless you've been alerted to it thus far, that you have to worry about.
So I'm going to talk a little bit now just about 3.8 and 3.12, which are the background check procedures and the parent-guardian consent verification procedures, which is like a tongue twister kind of. So just basically those, along with 3.11, are kind of these verification pieces of TQS 2.0. And with background check, which, oh, by the way, I will say that we will talk about all 3 of those standards since they were commonly missed on the next webinar, which will be recorded as well and put up on the NRC. But since they are commonly missed, I can just briefly mention that background check procedures, you need to have actual, like, procedures of how you go about background checks, and then have board minutes approving them. And I think where a lot of folks missed was the documentation piece. And again, that aspect is, well, there's a couple of places. So that aspect is included in that board staff and volunteer Excel tracker that's now on the personnel page of the NRC, as well as there's a background check Excel document on the background check page of the NRC. I would actually recommend pulling down the guide from the background check page. It gives CS of Honolulu and what CS of Honolulu does for procedures pertaining to background check. There's things in there, you know, basically you need to think about as an affiliate what, you know, might be disqualifying offenses, description of how, oh, that's actually a really important one, how those who haven't been, whose background checks have not been approved, will they or won't they be able to interact with children? That's, again, up to you. Some affiliates say absolutely not. They are not allowed to work with kids or student data until the background check comes back. Other affiliates say, yes, we allow that, but here's the stipulations. So those are all things that need to be included in those procedures. Because, again, this is a youth protection thing, it needs to be also reviewed by your board, which is why we require the board minutes. And then, of course, you need to show the background check has been completed on all individuals who work with students and or student data within the last 3 years. So I know some folks have asked questions about, well, does my, I don't even know, like, does my human resources person, I guess, need to get a background check? You know, if they work with student data, that's just something that you and your affiliate, right, sensitive data, you and your affiliate need to determine. But again, it's all about thinking, it's about youth protection. And then, did you want to add something in there?
Yeah, and we would recommend that you err on the side of caution. So just as an example, here at the national office, every employee at the national office, regardless of whether we even go out into the network regularly, undergoes a background check. And the reason is because as an industry, as a student-serving organization, you could potentially have access to sensitive data. You may potentially have access to students. And so that is something that we enforce here at the national office. The other piece of that is that your HR person will have access to sensitive employee data, including the results of any background checks that might be conducted, and therefore maybe something where you would consider doing a background check. What we want to make sure of is that you're meeting the intent of the standard and that you are addressing this 3-year background check requirement, that it's conducted every 3 years for your employees that have access to that data. If your policies would indicate that you know, your site coordinators undergo every 3 years, but one of your, you know, an administrative individual within your central office only undergoes one at hiring, that's probably okay. We would probably look at those on a case-by-case basis to determine whether they met the intent of the standard, but it's something for you all to consider locally and to, like Julie said, sort of assess your areas of risk and where you want to mitigate those. But as a best practice, we would say, you know, background checks when working in the type of industry that we work in, as you know, service organizations, should be pretty high on your list of you know, including as many folks as seems reasonable.
And then just quickly to talk about the parent guardian consent form verification procedures. So this is, again, ensuring that every student has parent guardian consent form signed and on file. And so you would write up the verification procedures about how you go about checking that. And then we actually do have an example of the procedures online, and then we have the form that you could fill out online as well. So it's not just, I think that that's important with all of these verification checks. It's really 2 components. It's the procedures themselves, how you go about doing something, and then it's the actual documentation to show that you've done it. So it's kind of dual, and I think that what we saw in 2017 is people missed one or the other. It was kind of harder to get both of them together, I guess. And so we want to make sure that you know on the NRC where to get those, and, you know, just making the resources available to you. So those are those 2 pieces, and as I mentioned, we'll talk about them more.
And I know that the question came from I think, an affiliate who might be going through our additional verification component. So I just wanted to speak to that briefly. And of course, we have a webinar for folks who are going through that additional component in March. And so we'll dive really deep into each of those pieces, what we need or are asking you to do, and what we will be doing for you in that process. So the national office does conduct an additional verifications of 10% of our affiliate for the verifications, and an additional 10% that undergoes site visits as well. And you know, those are going to be dived into source data for those documentations. So you will provide the documentation and the policies and procedures for your sort of phase 3 accreditation, and then we'll be doing a deeper dive into a randomized list of your source data for parent guardian consent and data verifications, and then for 100% of your background checks for your staff. So we'll dive much deeper into that on that webinar, because that information is really specifically, you know, important to you all, but not relevant for necessarily anyone who's going through reaccreditation. So definitely look forward to seeing you on that webinar so we can talk through what exactly we mean when we say source documentation, because you already have your procedures. Sometimes that means something different on different sites.
Great. More questions? questions? What do you think is challenging about reaccreditation for this year? I don't want to talk, but I can say what I think might be challenging and how we try to mitigate it. Remember, you can unmute yourself if you're muted. You can post in the chat. Anything that, you know, you've poked around the NRC and you're like, oh, I really wish there was a resource on, tell me, I'll find it for you, or I'll try to find it, or maybe I'll just make it, you know, create it. So. Folks are very quiet today. Well, again, this is really your time. I don't want to keep anyone if there are no other questions, but I'm also happy to stay on the line for the next 10 to 15 minutes while things pop up. One thing that I was going to say with challenges, I think that we tried to help with this year is using the board calendar that we have as a resource to kind of help you plan your board meetings. So many of these policies, and then of course you saw with the financial monitoring, require, you know, either board approval or board review and receipt of finances, and so we hope that that calendar is something that, you know, you can plan. So if you only meet quarterly, you know that, you know, at your quarter 3 or quarter 1, you know, meeting, you need to do these things, and, you know, quarter 2, you need to do these things, et cetera. So that's a tool that's in box.com for your use as you kind of get ready for reaccreditation the deadline coming up.
One other thing I'll just note, I think a lot of folks, and we've talked about this on a couple different webinars, a lot of folks who feel like so they need to update their personnel policies, or they need to develop different procedures or policies that haven't been developed yet, will oftentimes not include them in their uploads if they don't think they're going to meet standards, and I understand why. However, we know just from an extension period standpoint, as well as from a review standpoint, it is better to upload what you have versus not uploading anything at all, so that we can review, you know, a comprehensive set of documentation and make some determinations around whether or not those things have met standards, and then also understand what it may take to be able to address any findings that come up. And so we may provide a longer extension period because we feel like we understand kind of where you all are and what, you know, it may take, you know, a longer period of time, whether that means we think that the affiliate will likely have to put something through legal review, and that might take a while, or it might be something where an affiliate has to get board approval, and there's a board review process, and that may take a while. If we don't see a document, we sort of we assume they have it, and just we're not able to upload it, so those extension periods are shorter. And so we recommend that you do upload them. Also, what we have found is when we do look at things that affiliates have not uploaded because they were worried that it didn't meet standards, that in the end it actually does. Or that plus some other documentation we've seen have covered the intent of the standard, and so we feel comfortable that the affiliate has met that requirement. So I would say it is, as some of the challenges I think, you know, that have been brought up around, well, we're not sure whether these things meet or don't meet standards, and so are nervous about sending them your way for review, please do send them. We get a better picture of your operations, not just for that standard, but for all standards, if we see documentation, and it becomes less of a red flag for us as we go through that process. So.
The other quick thing I wanted to mention is personnel policies recently had an additional IT security policy added to it in the tweaks, which was from some insurance that we were debating requiring, and we've basically decided that the IT security policy would be the better way to go. I recently uploaded some documents to the NRC that speak to that, and there's some questions there that can help you think through the IT security that you'll want to include in your personnel policies. So you can find all that on the personnel page of the NRC. Any other questions for us? One other thing that I would say is that if you're going through your accreditation in 2018, there's 39 of you, and I think that it's really, that cohort, I think I want to use these open office hours to kind of be more conversational and also to see how other affiliates are doing it. So if you're, going through and you're in Texas and you want to hear about how somebody in Pennsylvania is doing it, we can use this time here to kind of talk about different policy aspects, why, maybe the Texas affiliate has a certain policy and effect that would pertain to Pennsylvania, or ways really to kind of cross-collaborate and make it more about kind of the understanding that you're in this process together and it's not, that you're all by yourself as an affiliate. So I definitely would recommend reaching out to me with any questions, but also kind of looking to who else is going through and collaborating with, asking them some questions too. All right, well, if we don't have any other questions, I think I can end a few minutes early. Again, I will be hosting a webinar very similar to this next month on March 22nd. We'll be discussing the other, there's technically 6 business standards, most commonly missed business standards. And I ask that you, if you want to join, we'll be recording it, and please bring your questions at that time, and I hope to see you there. Thanks so much for joining. Have a great rest of your day.